Welcome to Full Stack PHP Web Development course. The display property. The display property is the most important CSS property for controlling layout. The display property specifies how an element is displayed. Every HTML element has a different default display value depending on what type of element it is. The default display value for most elements is block or inline. This panel shows a div element which is hidden by default display none value. It is styled with CSS. We use JavaScript to show it. Change it to display block. Block level elements. A block level element always start on a new line and take up full width available. Stretch out to the left and right as far as it can. The div element is a block level element. Example of block level elements are div, h1 to h6, p, form, header, footer, section. Inline elements. Span is an inline element. Also the anchor and image are inline elements. Inline element does not start on a new line and only takes up as much width as necessary. Display none is commonly used with JavaScript to hide or show elements without deleting or recreating them. Take a look at our last example on this page if you want to know how this can be achieved. The script element uses the display none as default. Override the default display value. As mentioned, every element has a default display value. However, you can override it. Changing an inline element to block element or vice versa can be useful for making the page look a specific way and still follow the web standards. A common example is making inline list element for the horizontal menus. Here we have an unordered list and list is applied display inline block. Due to this display the list element or inline. Hide an element, display none or visibility hidden. Display none, remove the element, display visibility hidden, hide the element but does not remove the space occupied that element. Reset element, reset all the element and return their visibility and display to block and show. CSS layout, the position property. The position property specifies the type of positioning method used for an element, static, relative, fixed, absolute, or sticky. The position property specifies the type of positioning method used for an element. There are 5 values for position: static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. Position static. HTML elements are position static by default. Static position elements are not affected by the top, bottom, left, or right properties. An element static with the position. An element with the static position is not positioned in any special way. It is always positioned according to the normal flow of the web page. Position relative. An element with the position relative is positioned relative to its normal position. In this example, we have a div element which is applied to the relative class element of a div. After applying the position relative, we can use the left and right and top and bottom values to specify the position of that element. So if I also use the top value, it will move the element little slighter below from the previous element. If I remove the value of left, it will just left align this div element to the previous element. An element with position fixed is position relative to the viewport, which means it is always stay in the same place even if page is scrolled. The top, right, bottom and left property are used to position the left element. The fixed element does not leave a gap in the page where it would normally have been located. Now after applying the position fixed, I applied the right and bottom. So it started. So it is moved to the bottom, and I gave a margin of 100 pixels from the bottom and the 10 pixels from the right side. If I have a element on the pages, and let me make it scroll. All the element when I scroll moves up and down, but this fixed position element stays fixed during the scroll. An element with the position absolute is position relative to the nearest position ancestor instead of position relative to the viewport like fixed. Here is a simple example. The div element has position relative, the div element has a position absolute. Now we have two div styles. The main container is the relative div, and inside it we use the absolute position div element. What happens when I take this absolute position element outside of this relative elements? It will mess up the page and is now surrounded by whole body of document. Lastly, it is position sticky. An element with position sticky is positioned based on the user scroll position. A sticky element toggles between relative and fixed. Depending on the scroll position, it is positioned relative until a given offset position is met in the viewport. Then it sticks in place like position fixed. Check out the example. This is sticky element. As soon as I scroll, it moves, and as soon as it reaches to the top of this its outer element, it is sticked with the body of that document and is behaving like a fixed element. CSS layout. The z-index property. The z-index property specifies the stack order of an element. The z-index property, when elements are positioned, they can overlap each other elements. The z-index property specifies the stack order of an element. Which element should be placed in front of or behind the others. An element can have a positive or negative stack order. So in this example, this is a heading. Because image has a z-index of -1, it will place behind the text. Z-index example. An element with the greatest stack order is always above an element with a lower stack order. So we have three elements wrapped by the one container element: black box, gray box, and green box. Container has position relative, and while the black box, gray box has a position absolute, black box has position relative, and green box has position absolute. We applied z index 1 to black box. We applied z index 1 to black box, and it moved behind to gray box and green box. Green box has value for the z index 2, and lastly z index value 3 is applied to gray box, and it is on the top of other two boxes. CSS layout float and clear. The CSS float property specifies how an element should float. The CSS clear property specifies what element can float beside the cleared element and on which side. Float left, float right. The float property is used for positioning and formatting content. For example, let an image float left to the text in an container. The float property is used for positioning and formatting content. For example, let an image float left to the text. Let an image float left to the text in a container. The float property can have one of the following values: left, the element float to the left of its container; right, the element float to the right of its container; none, the element does not float; inherit, the element inherits the float value of its parent. In its simple use, the float property can be used to wrap text around the images. The following example specifies that an image should float to the right in a text. The following example specifies that an image should float to the left in a text. In this example, we have a div element with the div1, div2, div3 class, and div element, all three elements are applied float left. All three elements CSS layout display inline block. Compared to display inline, the major difference is that display inline block allows to set of width and height to the element. Also with the display inline block, the top and bottom margin paddings are respected, but with display inline they are not. Compared to display block, the major difference is that display inline block does not add a line break after the element, so the element can sit next to other elements. Horizontal navigation links. By default, list items are displayed vertically. In this example, we use display inline block to display them horizontally side by side. We have a simple unordered list with the class name. The nav class is applied background color, list style type none, and text line margin and padding to 0. Then list inside that nav class is applied display inline block, font size and padding. When I run, it will make a beautiful menu. We can also apply text CSS, text decoration to none, text transform to uppercase, which will make it beautiful menu.